and stimulated and generous and kind. So it's all of those things. People, I welcome questions to Professor Davis now. Well, while people are thinking, and we do actually have numbers of people in here, it's not that it's just you and me having a chat. There is one now. Is the runner with the... No, we're out of a runner. One moment.
Thank you. Hello, I'm glad to see you here with us. My name is Mikanayata Faine. I'm a student midwife and anthropologist, well, outside the academy anthropologist, and have read your book. We have a study group for Black reproductive justice anthropologists. But I will say that I live in Baltimore. I'm a transnational feminist. I've done work in Ethiopia, where my family is from. Mm-hmm. And the use of terms like reproductive justice and the lack of use of terms like birth justice, actually, have been interesting in the global context, so in seeing how it's being used outside of the US. And I know that you touched on the transnational feminist framework, but you're really grounded in reproductive justice and, you know, this theoretical framework. Being in the US, we really do, it makes sense to us, especially those of us on the ground. I'm a doula. We use those tenets by Sister Song and the tenets of birth justice to inform how we actually work on the ground in our communities. And so my question to you is, what has been sort of your views or your opinions on the use and misuse of these terms and how they're being sort of thrown around very freely now in the realm of theory, and not maybe so much in praxis, but yeah, if that made sense to you.
I think it did. Thank you so much for the question. Good to see you all. And I'm really so sorry that I couldn't be there. But this sounds like it's been an amazing conference. I think one of the issues around the use of reproductive justice, or the uses of reproductive justice and birth justice, is that I actually feel like there's a sort of false dichotomy between those two, that might set up a situation where people using those terms create a kind of horizontal hostility. I personally use the term reproductive justice because I think I'm very interested in the incorporation of all of the forms of justice that are necessary for people to have the kinds of lives and live the kinds of lives that they want to use. I also, at the same time, I think that people use the term flagrantly without full acknowledgement around who created the term, the context in which it was created, and in some ways, I think that can lead to a kind of misuse of the term. I think that birth justice in particular is really one of the tenets of reproductive justice. And I'd be interested actually to hear from you what you see some of the tensions as being, given that you do this sort of, that you do transnational work.
Okay, I won't open that up for you to now answer that. I'm going to look for some more questions and make sure that the primary voice is done as. More questions? Don't let this opportunity go by, people. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. My name is Tsitsi Mashauri, based in the US. And I came in late, so this might have already been asked. But you talked about this idea of unevenness when you gave your talk, which I found really fascinating. And I was wondering if you could expand on that a bit more and what you see as sort of its conceptual advantages, like what do we gain by using this idea of unevenness versus some other concept? Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much. No one has asked that question. I've actually just really signed on. I was thinking about unevenness in part because I really wanted to sort of link theoretically the topic of reproduction to literally the kinds of investments that have been made historically in the lives of white women in comparison to Black women, but in a global context. And the term I deployed, uneven reproduction, really comes out of the work of Professor Leith Mullings, who wrote about uneven development. And in her work, she was really describing the kinds of investments that are made or not made, actually, in Black communities in the United States. In particular, she was speaking of Harlem, New York, and laying out really a kind of economic analysis. My interest in the term was really trying to decenter a US-centric framework in how we understand the reproductive capacities or incapacities of reproducing people. Someone said to me when I first started utilizing the term, well, isn't this the same as stratified reproduction? To which I said, it's not that I'm trying to differentiate between stratified reproduction and uneven reproduction, but I'm very much committed to really unpacking the imperial influences, the colonial degradations that have occurred in Black, Brown, and also queer communities, but in particular Black communities diasporically. And my thought was, if we can look at the historical contexts in which Black women's and Black birthing people's lives have been compromised because of a lack of commitment to their health and, well, I should say our health and well-being, that when we do that diasporically, we see that there are many, many more commonalities than differences. This is important to me from a transnational perspective, because although I firmly believe that there are particular contexts in which we must understand all people's lives, there are ways in which threads of similarity weave together a kind of structural degradation that is not only an afterlife of slavery, but also an afterlife of colonialism and an afterlife of settler colonialism and an afterlife of imperialism. And so in some ways, I might argue that the framing of uneven reproduction really asks us to deeply incorporate a sort of historiography of particular places, deeply incorporate an understanding that the effects of racism and classism that tends to be the normative conversation that happens around, as I said, a US-centric perspective is not I don't think that that's a sustainable kind of conversation, that we need to be making links.
Thank you very much. I mean, your comment just then around US centrism, one of the things that's been enormously rich at this meeting has been that it hasn't been US centric, but it has really drawn attention to class, especially in terms of access to reproductive alternatives, futures, and access to care. But it's been wonderfully refreshing for people to be talking around it, drawing on those paradigms and those basic divides, and not attending always to a dominance of a particular geographic area. Have we got more questions? I thought I saw, I did. Okay, thank you.
Hi, Professor. I'd just like to thank you for your keynote address on what was Wednesday morning for us in South Africa. I would just like to ask you to build on the answer that you were talking about now, to ask how we extend the term reproductive justice towards global people who also want to access this groundbreaking technology, including egg freezing. And who want to do something about the fact that this is exclusively in the hands of the elites who can afford it, rather than being used for universal access. And what do you think those of us who really care about our research work and our advocacy work being around universal access, what can you suggest for us to do to eliminate that?
Wow, I think that's a really good and very big question. I mean, I think we really need to acknowledge that justice is and should, I mean, it is inherently a universal concept. The fact that it was developed by 12 Black women in the United States does not preclude the kind of justices that many of them saw and still see as important in a global context. What is it that we can do? I mean, I actually think that the kind of coming together that's happening right now, where you all are, is an important component to how we can forge alliances around the conversation of justice. And where there is, there's a saying, where there's injustice in one place, there's injustice everywhere, which suggests that we absolutely need to be working collaboratively across, the manufactured borders, which are also real borders that exist. I think one of the most important examples of that took place last year when I was in France and helped to coordinate what I think was the first racism and reproduction conference that took place. And we brought together doulas and birth workers, reproductive justice advocates, and scholars, many of whom identified as Black. And we brought them together to talk about what were the particular ways in which racism infiltrated various forms of access, and obviously the most negative ways. What were the ways that we might learn from each other about what organizing can look like? And some of those conversations have led to really, I think, important alliances, and moving outside of the domain of our geographic limitations means that we need to be sharing what are the policies that are occurring in various places, what are the ways that we can support people. I remember being asked to sign a response to the UK's the UK tried to organize a policy where Black women in particular would be more likely to receive a C-section at, prior to 40 weeks to try to decrease the likelihood of premature birth and maternal deaths. And there were a number of us in the US who were adamantly opposed to this policy. So those kinds of relationships need to be built, I think, need to be strengthened. And keeping communication across space and time, I think is really important. I also am a doula, and my doula training was in the US, but also with a UK-based doula group, Abuela Doulas, and being in conversation with Red Tent, which is in Scotland, and wanting to do more with birth workers and advocates on the continent. So those are some things, but I also think it's really helpful, and this is something that I think people in the US may not do as much. We don't call on people from outside the US to help support us in our advocacy and activism efforts. And I'm not saying that we don't do it, but I don't think it happens as often as it should. We're stronger together than we are individually.
Thank you. We've got one more question.
Thank you, Dr. Davis, for the Q&A. My name is Deyanira Ibarra. I'm a student at the University of Arizona. And something I've been sitting with the past few days is that we don't want to ignore the violence of medicalization or obstetric racism. But I was wondering if you had advice for strategizing how to find a balance in discerning how and what violences we do document without perpetuating more damage-centered narratives.
Thank you. That's a really wonderful and important question. One of your question reminds me of a conversation that I had with a group of both colleagues and students in Georgia last year, and someone asked that very question, that the constant collection of narratives and experiences that are so devastating are also frightening. And someone said that we also need to collect and talk about the strength-based ways in which people find that space of not only support, but sort of self-advocacy of the positive experiences that they've had. We do tend to focus on catastrophe, and we need to talk about catastrophes because they do exist. But there are also people who both work as, obviously, reproductive advocates, people who have experiences that are quite positive. And sometimes the positive experiences are not within the context of what happens to people in the medical environment, but rather it's their response to what has happened, to a negative experience in a medical environment, that needs to also be lifted up. So we can call that resistance. We can call it, I don't like to use the term resilience, but we can call that resistance. We can call it resilience if we want to. But what I'm suggesting is the collection of narratives of not only people who experience obstetric racism, but people who are within the medical field, who challenge obstetric racism, who work outside of the medical paradigm to provide the kind of care, not services, that results in the most positive outcomes possible. I have sometimes felt I don't want to use the word guilty. I've sometimes felt concerned about my own focus on just time after time after time telling horrific stories, which people actually want to be told. But I have had people say to me, please share this particular experience that was positive. Please look at how what I did ended up in my having maybe the kind of experience that I wanted. Please look at how maybe I shifted my attention away from the medical complex and decided to do a home birth. Please talk about the ways in which some people have said, please talk about the ways in which not all birth advocates and reproductive justice advocates have the best interests of people at heart. So what we're talking about is the myriad of ways in which people have both positive and negative experiences, and kind of increase the conversation to acknowledge some of the more positive outcomes.
Okay, thank you. I think there's another question. So you will take this as the last one, if that's okay with you, Donna.
Fine.
This on? Yeah. A pleasure and an honor to be in the room with you. So thank you so much for making the time to return to us. We appreciate that. Yeah, I still have this pickle around how is obstetric violence and reproductive justice related? You know, how do we both align the kind of advocacy and activism, but also be able to define and make clear some of the differences?
How do we make and define differences between obstetric violence and reproductive justice?
Well, yeah, I want to know how are they related, right? For me, it's obvious, but as you said, are there? What are the? But of course, as concepts, they come from completely different places, right? Obstetric violence emerged in South America. We know reproductive justice emerged from a completely different group of scholars. And now, as there's, a transnational movements, and we are understanding both the kind of local and context specifics that these phenomena emerge differently in different places, right? So we have to be able to account for these different ways that they manifest, but also the commonalities. So it's that I'm asking about in relation to these concepts. Thanks.
And I think that's exactly what I was trying to say earlier. The fact that obstetric violence originates in Latin America conceptually, and the fact that reproductive justice originates in the United States does not mean that people were not having transnational conversations about the kinds of experiences that people want and about the kind of justice that people deserve. And I would argue that many of the, and they weren't all scholars, many of the they call themselves the founding mothers of reproductive justice, were doing work on an international level, on a transnational level, and have in fact been informed, they would say, by a human rights framework, which is actually something that the United States doesn't operationalize quite at all, right? So, we tend to, I think that there's a misconception that ideas and practices and frameworks that emerge in different places have no precedence where there was some kind of either intellectual, actual, or activist engagement where people have been conversing and talking. I mean, Loretta Ross, for example, has been a person, one of the founding mothers of reproductive justice, who's been doing work on the ground around a range of issues, including anti-rape, white supremacy, and doing work like that for over 40 years on an international level. So the links need to be made when we're doing our writing and when we're going into, you know, the archive, when we're talking to people and asking them just what, you know, what are the sort of ideological and practical frameworks that have influenced your thinking about particular issues. You know, obstetric violence is not mutually exclusive from reproductive justice, and RJ is not mutually exclusive from obstetric violence. And I think we do a tremendous disservice by not attending to that, those linkages. That's what I was actually trying to kind of get at in the article that I wrote about uneven reproduction, that there are linkages. Absolutely. What you said is absolutely correct. There are, in fact, particularities. What is the point, in my opinion, of honing in on particularities if we're not going to try to thread, you know, and weave together the tapestry that actually shows the longue durée of some of these consequences and the connections?
Okay.
So that
thank
needs
you.
to come in how we write. I'm sorry, that needs to come in how we write, what we read, where we go, you know, from literally from history to literature to anthropology, sociology, political science, et cetera. Somewhere in each of those separate disciplines is a thread, is a pattern that can't explain everything, but can certainly help us to understand the contemporary consequences have relationality, as you so aptly pointed out.
Thank you. I think that was a wonderful way to end this session. Join me, please, by thanking, in the conventional way, Professor Davis's intervention.
Thank you all.
You are welcome to stay on. This is now the closing session. Nawaz, are you going to come down the front and join me? And while you do, I'm going to start by making a few brief comments. Unfortunately, Andrea is not here because she had to, like a few other people, grab a flight. And airlines, a number of flights actually do go out at around 5 o'clock in the day. But what I want to do, and I've said that already a few times, is how wonderful this conference has been. And how stimulating the debates have been. And I think that people have been generous and kind while sustaining some very powerful discussions that have been stimulated by Dana-Ain Davis, Angela Akol and Wissal Ahmad's plenary sessions. And it's lovely to have Wissal still with us now. There've been something like 100 papers across the sessions, and they've been superb. I don't think there's been one session I've sat in where I haven't wished I'd had my computer to sort of distract myself or made lists of things to do later. I mean, to actually sit on the edge and be taking notes and thinking with you through these issues has been a great gift. I genuinely can't think of a conference that's kept me so engaged right through to the very end. We don't have time for further comments at this stage, but I do want to summarise before handing it over to Nolwazi with 3 key points that are relevant to you and to others. Firstly, we do not have definite plans to publish. There are, as I said, over 100 papers, and I'm sure that many of them are destined through your own efforts to be published in a range of venues. Andrea Nolwazi and I have talked about a few things that we would like to do, but we have no ownership over your products, and what we would like to see simply is through all of our joint efforts, ways in which we can distribute the kinds of debates and the richness of the data that we've heard over the last couple of days. The second no is this. We have no plans. We is simply Lenore, Nolwazi and Andrea as a little team with Tessa and several other people supporting us. We have no plans to convene another meeting like this in the near future. We also have no ownership over doing so, but it is very clear that there is a need to have this kind of meeting intermittently. And so I invite anybody here who wishes to do so to get in touch with us to share any emails, addresses that we have, and we will be there supporting you. And we're happy to share with you information about funding, and Nolwazi in a moment will thank the funders. And please do not report back to funders yourself that you didn't see a single funding logo up on the thing, because it was there in our mind, and every time I looked at that I thought of the funding organisations and how truly deeply grateful we are. It was an unfortunate slip. The third no is that we do not plan to establish a website of our own, nor a listserv, because if any of you, like me, are on a listserv, there is nothing worse than opening up your computer in the morning to 48 emails, many of which are listservs, and you'll never read them. However, we do not have... there is a website. I thought it might have been up there and it isn't. A website of the Medical and Health Humanities of Africa, which Kara Sampiris and Nolwazi Makonazi established, and that is on, I think, Facebook, or not, separate. Okay, Carla's going to talk about it briefly in a moment, so that there will be a space there will be a cyberspace for continued communication that is already up and running, and that seems to me a very sensible way to harness people's energies and costs and so on. With that, I'm going to hand this over to Nolwazi.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lenore. Before I thank everyone, I think that, Carla, you should come down and talk about the Medical and Health Humanities Africa Network.
Thank you. You see that little sneak there? I got in before you could leave. So I just wanted to spend a few moments just telling you about a space that might be able to give you some of the yeses, a space where you might be able to carry on conversation, work out ways to work with each other, build new networks. And that is the Medical and Health Humanities Africa Network. Nolwazi and I and Charlotte have been driving a lot of it, but we are by no means the sole founders. It is a network that has a long trajectory in many spaces, and if you're really interested in knowing more, we did a special issue in 2018, so please feel free to read all about it. Okay, just in terms of a really, really quick, brief overview, I want to spend a few slides just saying you basically the principles that govern how we try and do our things and where you can find us. And to build on Nolwazi's request that if you weren't friends or kin or colleagues before you arrived here, that you use this platform to become that. The Medical and Health Humanities, in its essence in Africa, responds to medical humanities and the development of medical humanities in the UK and the US. And its essential thing is about looking at health differently across humanities, social sciences, arts, life sciences, earth sciences, and all the other sciences. We're tired of so much of the violence and horror and negativity that many of us saw and experienced both in healthcare practices and in academia. And so we want to try and make something different. And for that reason, we are particularly interested in critical kindness and generosity, both epistemic and other. We do weird things like the organizers did here. We share money across universities, which puts finance officials into horror, but makes things work in other spaces. We can be found on 3 spaces. The Facebook group is the most active at the moment, and that is the link to the group. We have around 814 members. There is a membership approval process. You have to agree to be nice and not like super nasty, and not advertise things like nobody wants to buy your secondhand shoe. Okay, like that's not happening. No, and then on the YouTube channel, which is also available to members to use, there are recordings of previous conferences, book launches. The website is currently undergoing a radically exciting new transformation. So if you go there now, it says it's coming. But we will let you know on Facebook when it does come. So join Facebook and then you'll find out about that. And you can leave Facebook after that. Yeah, no, you won't. These are just some of the people here. These are, you can see we're all looking a little older. When we first started, these were many of our members. And you will see many of these members are still here and still part of this process. We have built slowly. We have built carefully. And we are trying to always ensure it is a space where the people who are members can decide what should be there, and that it should not be South Africa or any other country telling people what they should or shouldn't be doing, or where and how they should be doing it. We have partnerships in numerous countries. The plan one day is to have like a full Africa-wide, huge, giant medical and humanities Africa with a central hub. But that's for when we have beers and talk about that. We have some formal alliances with medical and health humanities centers, and these include things like scholarships for younger emerging academics. We post information about scholarships, about fellowships, about publications opportunities on the Facebook group. So it's also a way to keep people informed. And we love it when members say that they've graduated or that they've just published something. We are also here to celebrate the achievements of people working in the field and in the area. We have had a variety of less formal or semi-formal engagements with different spaces, including the Center for Advancement of Scholarship, the School of Public Health where I'm based, specific research projects, other parallel thinking together spaces like the Critical Food Studies, Environmental Humanities South, and Animal Law Reform. So we're always looking to think and build differently across time and space. The underlying principles you can read about, because I don't have time for the whole thing: consensual, collaborative, epistemic, kindness, curiosity, those are them. But primarily inclusion, access, and social justice. That's what, when we looked at what people were doing, what we found people were doing. We didn't set out to do it, it's what people were doing. And so we have great faith that people will continue doing that. Yes, so we are also unashamedly Africa-led, Africa-facing, and Africa-focused. We will not be anymore the African add-ons. Nawazi and I have spent a lot of time about being the add-ons, and no more. We are like, it's not happening. So we're happy to work collaboratively and consensually and carefully and respectfully, but not with that last minute when you call us because you need an African-based space. That is where we have always put ourselves and placed ourselves. So again, I would like to say you are welcome. You are welcome to come, to join, to become new friends, to make and find new kin, and to work together to bring about rewilding in the ways that you imagine them. Thank you very much.
And now we will come to Charlotte, who will be announcing the winners for the photo competition.
I'm actually not doing an announcement. I made a small little video. JD, if you don't mind, and some background music because I didn't add music. If the 3 winners are here, you're welcome to come and get your prizes. Otherwise, find me or I take them.
Thank you, everyone. And now I would like to acknowledge some of the people that made this possible. I'd like to start by acknowledging the 2 projects behind this conference, and that was the Wellcome-funded, trust-funded Reimagining Reproduction, Making Babies, Making Kin and Citizens in Africa. The second project is the Emerging Assisted Reproductive Markets in Southern Africa project, which was funded by the Australian Research Council. I'd also like to thank the following institutions and organizations that we received funding from, and that's the National Research Foundation in South Africa, the Venegren, the UK Research and Innovation, King's College London, the University of Pretoria, and in particular the administrative staff at the Centre for the Advancement of Scholarship, the University of the Witwatersrand, Monash University, and in particular Amy Webb, who did the program design, the University of Amsterdam. I'd also like to thank the members of the steering committee and the technical team, and of course the 4 keynote speakers, Trudy Garrett, Wissal Ahmed, Angela Akol, and Dana-Ain Davis. And special mention to Michelle Pentecost, who I cannot, oh, there she is, and the Trajectories Project, to Katrina McLeod and the CSSR at Rhodes University for sponsoring the cocktail drinks, Agneta Nyabudi, who got us in touch with the Springs Community Empowerment Foundation, who were the people that made the bags for the conference, Tandiwe Kumalo and Nikki Dawson, who from Ububele, who were the people who were behind the film screening and the discussion last night. I'd also like to thank the Future Africa team, in particular the events team, the accommodation team, the catering team, and the operations and cleaning team. I'd also like to thank AJR Audio, who have been in charge of the audiovisual aspect of the conference, and also the UP IT team, who have helped us with the submission portal. And of course, the volunteers of the conference and the Reimagining Reproduction Project Fellows, the people who receive the bursaries, and all these different groups deserve special acknowledgement. Really thank you all for your work in making this conference easy to navigate and seamless, and especially for chairing the sessions. And of course, we would like to thank Charlotte Visachi. Many of you have communicated with her at the various stages of the conference, in the planning, in the unfolding, and really without Charlotte, you know, our Re-worlding conference gathering would look very different and would not be the same. And we have a little gift for Charlotte. And finally, to all of you conference participants, thank you very much for your presentations, your thoughts, your conversations, your provocations, and your laughter. It's been a fantastic 4 days. Thank you.
We can't leave without saying an enormous thank you to you, Lenora, you, Nolwazi, and sorry, the third didn't, but yes. You said it. It's one of these amazing conferences where I've been to everything, actually. I've not taken a time off at all. I've been sitting with my notebook, making notes.